Welcome, everyone. It is noon, so we'll go ahead and get started, and people will continue to join, and that's just fine. Thanks, everyone, for joining us here today for the session of Keeping Kids Safe that is focused on bullying. I'm Christy Ganya, and I'm a program manager for Telehealth ROCKS. Telehealth ROCKS is a federally funded program that focuses on school-based behavioral health, and we do this by working on social determinants, supporting school-based services, and telementoring trainings just like this one. Just a few notes for you. This session is being recorded and we will send it to you afterwards. Your microphone has been muted, but we invite your comments, so please either use the chat or unmute to ask a question. And then it really helps us to track attendance if you will either type your name and organization into the chat, or if you'll make sure your first and last name are visible on your Zoom screen. Just a note on disclosures, we don't have any, and all of the information that's presented is the best evidence-based knowledge available. And then a couple of reminders for after the session. We will send the slides and recording. Just give us a little bit of time to process those. I'll send those to you through email, and then we'll also post them on the Telehealth ROCKS website and the Facebook page. We do track attendance for all the sessions, and we will send you a certificate of attendance twice during the series. So after this session, we'll send a certificate for the 2023 attendance, and then you'll receive another certificate in April for the 2024 attendance. So we're thrilled to have Daryl here to present today on bullying. And then later in the presentation, we'll hear from Aaron from the Eldon, Missouri School District. So Daryl, I will hand it to you to get us started.
Thanks, Christy. Yeah, my name is Daryl Hesse. I'm a doctoral student in the clinical child psychology program at KU. And I'm glad to be here today to talk a little bit about bullying. So we can go to the next slide. I think it's helpful to begin by defining the behaviors we're talking about when we talk about bullying. So I thought we'd start out with a word cloud. And I wanted to ask what you think of when you hear the word bullying, what some examples of bullying are that you've seen or experienced.
So we put a link in the chat, and if you click on that, you don't have to enter your name or anything like that. You can skip that part. And then if you enter your words as either words smashed together or with a hyphen in them, that will make sure that they all stick together. You can also use the QR code if that is easier. So we'll leave the instructions up here for just a minute, and then we'll hop to the word cloud.
Okay. So kind of the biggest one so far seems to be cyber or control. I also saw that Jackie put power dynamic in the chat. Harassment, bullying comes to mind. That makes sense. Bossy, verbal, abusive, physical, repeated, control, school. So where bullying might be most often occurring. Yeah, so I think this gave us a pretty good idea of what we all think when we hear about bullying. Christy, do you mind taking us back to the slides? And can you go to, thank you. So the National Center Against Bullying provides a useful definition for us. They describe bullying as the ongoing and deliberate misuse of power in relationships through repeated verbal, physical, and or social behavior that intends to cause physical, social, and or psychological harm. So a lot of you already tapped into these concepts. I saw the word repeated. I saw power dynamic, control. So kind of all of these components are what make up bullying as opposed to other types of aggressive or just kind of unfriendly behavior. Bullying can occur in and out of school. So somebody did, or multiple people wrote school. It can occur in person. It can also occur online or through digital communication. It's important to keep in mind that bullying is functional. So children bully others in order to obtain physical, social, or psychological goods. For example, a child might bully another child to get a toy or a preferred seat. A child may also victimize another child because they think it will make others like them more, or it may make them more popular. And in fact, there is evidence that bullying can establish a child's place within a social hierarchy. So it may serve a protective function for some children that they bully so that they are less likely to be bullied by others. Bullying gives perpetrators a sense of control. So children who bully others may also do so to feel more psychologically in control or powerful over another child. Of course, with bullying, children do not always achieve the objectives that they're hoping to achieve when bullying. So they don't always get what they want. They don't always gain that social capital. It doesn't always protect them from bullying from others. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So aggressive behaviors characteristic of bullying typically fall into one of these 4 categories. I think I saw all 4 of these categories in that word cloud in some capacity. Examples of physical aggression include shoving, pushing, punching, stealing, or using physical intimidation, so threatening to use physical force, even if not using physical force. Examples of verbal aggression include name-calling or teasing. Examples of relational or social aggression include gossiping or spreading rumors about someone or deliberately excluding them from a group. Examples of digital acts of aggression, or a lot of us would call it cyberbullying, include using technology like social media or messaging to tease, threaten, embarrass, or intimidate someone online or over the phone through like texting or messaging. Next slide, please. It's also helpful to clarify what bullying isn't. Since bullying is ongoing or repeated, single episodes of social rejection, nastiness, spite, and random acts of aggression or intimidation do not constitute bullying because they are not necessarily ongoing. Differences in power is also an important component of bullying, which is something that you all picked up on in that word cloud. So random acts of aggression or conflicts like mutual disagreements or mutual arguments between people of similar power do not constitute bullying because they do not reinforce a real or an imagined power differential. That's not to say that these situations aren't harmful or that they don't require intervention, but they're not characteristic of bullying when we're talking about bullying. Next slide, please. Okay, bullying is prevalent. About a third of kids ages 12 to 18 years experience bullying or have experienced bullying, according to the US Department of Health. It may surprise you or it may not that bullying rates are highest in middle school at 38% and lowest in primary school at 9%, with high school rates of bullying falling in the middle between those two. So high school rates of bullying are lower than middle school rates. Similarly, rates of cyberbullying are highest in middle school at 33% and they're lowest in primary school at 5%. And I think that's unsurprising that some of that probably has to do with access to technology, that younger kids just don't have the same access to technology. Rates of bullying may also differ based on sex or gender, race, or ethnicity. Female students report slightly higher rates of experiencing bullying, 25% compared with 19% for males. Female students are also more likely to report being the victims of rumors, being teased, being called names, or being excluded from activities on purpose. In contrast, male students are more likely to report physical acts of aggression, like being pushed, shoved, tripped, or spit on. So kind of the quality of bullying, there seems to be sex differences on average. In a 2019 report, the National Center for Education Statistics identified racial differences in regard to bullying. So students reported their race and then self-reported bullying. Students reporting their race as two or more races were most likely to be bullied at 37%. Then students identifying as white at 25%, students identifying as Black at 22%, and students identifying as Asian at 13%. And in respect to ethnicity, non-Hispanic students were more likely to report bullying compared with Hispanic students. It's important to note that these prevalence rates are overall prevalence rates. So these are not taking into account students' identities in relation to overall composition of their school. And we'll talk about how being perceived as different is a risk factor for bullying in a few slides. So can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I'm kind of wondering, based on your all's experiences or knowledge about bullying, where you think bullying happens the most when it happens at school. So like where in the school building or the facility do you think bullying is most likely to occur? So I see lunchroom and locker rooms both look pretty big. Hallways, bathrooms, bathroom again. Room, I think maybe means classroom. Yeah, it seems like also somebody's referencing like the digital bullying that's happening, that it's not maybe in person, even if it's occurring at school. Yeah, so it seems like the biggest word is probably unsupervised, room, bathroom, and hallways. Yeah, and then I'm seeing in the chat as well that people are identifying, oh yeah, bus, hallways, lunchroom, unstructured environments, texting. Yeah, so we can return to the next slide. Yep. So I think hallway was one of the biggest ones. Hallway was kind of the top one, where 43.4% of kids reported experiencing bullying in that location. 42.1% of kids also endorsed experiencing bullying in the classroom, then the cafeteria, outside on school grounds. I wasn't sure if anyone would identify this as kind of a location, but people did, that even at school, kids are experiencing victimization online or over text, that even in person, that kind of cyberbullying is still pretty inescapable. And then finally, bathroom or locker room was also mentioned. It's helpful to understand where bullying is most likely to occur. It can better inform prevention from kind of a school perspective. It can help schools post monitors or increase supervision in certain areas, or be more attentive to bullying behaviors in certain areas. And it's clear from this list, though, that although 42% of kids experience bullying at some point in the classroom, a lot of these locations, really the rest of these locations, have less supervision and less structure. So we can go to the next slide, please. So I think it's appropriate here to touch on cyberbullying, because even at school, it's something pretty inescapable. And it also has some unique qualities. So because many of us are always with our devices, I mean, I have my phone right here. Most of you probably have you're on your phone right now. And that includes kids or teens, that they're often with their devices. So cyberbullying can feel omnipresent because it's always there. And it's not just at school that children can experience these behaviors compared with in-person victimization. It's also at home or over the weekend. So it feels more inescapable. Cyberbullying may also include messages, posts, or photos that may not get deleted. So they may stay online for long periods of time. So it's not just that technology is highly accessible, that it's really persistent, but certain acts of bullying may also feel longer lasting or maybe more permanent, that kids can return to cruel or hurtful posts or pictures over and over again. Cyberbullying is also unique in that it has the potential to be anonymous more so than in person. You can pass notes around, but I think cyberbullying is really unique and that you don't always know who is making fun of you or who is posting about you. So the victim may not know exactly who their bully even is. The consequences for cyberbullying are similar to bullying in person, and we'll talk more about those kinds of consequences in a few slides. But cyberbullying can feel more perseverant, which can make consequences worse for the victim. There are anti-bullying laws in all states, actually, but cyberbullying may break additional laws, so there may be even greater repercussions for the bully. Interestingly and importantly, children who are at risk for in-person bullying at school are also at risk for cyberbullying. There is not evidence that cyberbullying creates more victims of bullying, since a lot of these kids are experiencing bullying in both locations. So cyberbullying provides an additional avenue for victimization, but does not impact prevalence rates for bullying per se. Next slide, please. So research has identified several risk factors for bullying. While girls are slightly more at risk for bullying than boys, there are bigger gender differences in the type of bullying experienced. Boys are more likely to commit and experience physical bullying, while girls are more likely to commit and experience verbal and relational bullying. Girls report being bullied for physical appearance more often than boys, and girls are more likely to be cyberbullied via direct messaging as opposed to through pictures or posts. As we discussed, bullying peaks around middle school age and declines throughout high school, and cyberbullying is more common among older children, but specifically middle school students. Perception of being different is one of the biggest risks for victimization, with differences of physical appearance being the most frequent trigger of childhood bullying as reported by children. Body dissatisfaction and overweight or obese status is also associated with increased risk of being bullied. Gender nonconformity has been identified as a risk factor for victimization, and LGBTQ+ youth experience bullying at higher rates than their straight or cisgendered peers. Kids report that race or ethnicity is a frequent reason for bullying, so they identify it as a reason that they are bullied. And lower socioeconomic status and migration status are all risk factors for bullying. For all of these risk factors, though, it's important to keep in mind that the characteristic of the students, the characteristics of the other students matter. So it matters how different students are from their peers. And we know that the overall school environment matters. So how permissive the school is about bullying matters, how inclusive the school environment is. These things all impact victimization. So next slide, please. There are also identified risk factors for becoming a bully. So I've already touched on the gender and age differences. We also see that low self-control and impulsiveness are associated with increased bullying behaviors. Poor self-regulation, including emotion regulation, put people at risk for becoming a bully. Lower school achievement is a risk factor for becoming a bully, so getting poorer grades or having difficulty with learning. Lower empathy for others, lower self-esteem or feelings of worth about oneself, and depressive symptoms are all risk factors for bullying others. Social factors, including how a child's peers behave, but also how their parents behave, put youth at risk for engaging in bullying. So research has identified family dysfunction, as well as low parent or caregiver support, as being linked with bullying. Kind of interestingly, high levels of peer rejection are associated with initial bullying behaviors, but greater peer rejection is associated with decreases in bullying over time. So what that means is that for kids who bully but also experience peer rejection, so they're not accepted by their peers, bullying may not be as functional or as beneficial, so they tend not to do it as long. And next slide, please. Unsurprisingly, being victimized is associated with a variety of poor outcomes. So internalizing symptoms, so anxiety and depression symptoms, while a child is being bullied, but also subsequently. So even after bullying has stopped, kids are at risk of internalizing symptoms. Children who are bullied are also at greater risk for health problems, like sleep disturbances or physical pain associated with stress. We also see that kids who are victimized at school have poorer school performance, or are more likely to have poorer school performance. And there is some evidence, some kind of mixed evidence that victimization is associated with substance use, including nicotine and tobacco use. There is also evidence that bullying can be a contributing factor for suicide, though research kind of suggests that bullying is a contributing factor but not causal. So there's usually other things going on as well. Next slide, please. So there are also consequences of bullying for those who bully others. So those who bully are at increased risk of concurrent and future conduct problems. So delinquent behaviors, problems breaking the law, problems getting in trouble at school. Those who bully also tend to have poor interpersonal functioning as they get older. So they have more difficulties with relationships with friends and relationships with family members. There are also associations between bullying and subsequent forms of violence, including intimate partner violence in adulthood. And finally, bullying is associated with substance use for the bully. I mentioned for those who are victimized, but as well for those who bully. Next slide, please. So I think it's helpful to discuss a little bit about what we can kind of collectively do to reduce bullying. So for parents, I know many of you, probably most of you, are not here in a parenting capacity, but you probably work with parents pretty closely or pretty frequently. But parents should be observant. They should look for signs of bullying, kind of some of the signs of, or some of the consequences of victimization, like anxiety, depression, school refusal, difficulty in school, so getting worse grades. Parents can also help to improve social skills and coping skills related or relevant for bullying. So they can coach their children on how to handle a bullying situation, how to stand up for themselves while not engaging in fighting. That's a very important point, is not teaching them to fight back, but teaching them other appropriate responses. Parents can also provide emotional support and help their children respond adaptively to victimization. So find other ways to cope with difficult situations at school. Because of the risk of cyber victimization, it's very important that parents supervise technology use. That's going to be something that is kind of like a uniquely parent quality that when kids leave school, educators and schools can't restrict technology use. So parents want to be aware of how their children are using technology, which social media platforms they're on, what messaging they're using. And parents should also maintain strong communication with teachers and school administrators so that they can be made aware, or that they can make the school aware of bullying instances, and so that they can they can get support from their kids' teachers. Schools can aim to create inclusive, supportive environments. There's a lot of research that the overall school environment is a big contributing factor for bullying and sustained bullying. Providing students with education about bullying, firstly, like what it is, how to identify instances of bullying, but also helping them learn how to appropriately respond to bullying can also be helpful. It's important that schools look to research to inform policies and procedures. So for example, one 2020 quantitative review article found mixed evidence for the effectiveness of restorative justice on bullying. When I say restorative justice, that describes a non-punishment relationship-based resolution. So while there's evidence that restorative justice can improve overall school climates and reduce misbehavior, lots of other types of misbehavior, it's not always effective for reducing bullying across the board. And in some cases, victims of bullying may experience even more stress going through a restorative justice process. So just trying to stay tapped into kind of what research is finding regarding best practices. And likewise for schools as well as parents, just staying in contact with each other to ensure kind of the best care for kids. Next slide, please. Educators can also do a lot to try to reduce bullying or reduce the harms associated with bullying. So modeling kindness and respect in the classroom is hugely helpful, especially because we are social creatures. Kids are social creatures. We learn through social interactions. Kids learn through modeling, seeing what other people are doing, and reinforcement. Focusing on improving relationships in the classroom can also improve the overall classroom environment. So modeling kindness and respect, but also praising students when educators see other kids being kind and respectful can improve the classroom environment and really encourage those pro-social behaviors. That also includes using positive language. So telling kids what to do as opposed to what not to do is also helpful, and trying to kind of coach kids through tough social situations or through conflict. It's important that teachers talk about bullying, that it's a topic that comes up in class for like educational purposes, but also to make youth feel more comfortable talking about bullying and to make kids feel more comfortable coming to their teachers with bullying concerns. Because a lot of kids report going to their teachers when they are being bullied. It's important for teachers to be observant to instances of bullying. It's important to listen to potential victims, including respecting the wishes of privacy. I kind of say that keeping in mind what your institution's policies are, but if somebody approaches you about bullying and you're able to respect their privacy, that may oftentimes be what's most beneficial for them. Leading me to the last point, it's going to be really important for educators to know their institution's policies for bullying. So kind of all the recommendations I've given throughout this presentation should be couched in your school or your institution's rules for students and teachers. It's important to keep all that in mind. Next slide, please. Okay, so we'll end this didactic portion just by talking about some resources. And then I'll ask Erin to jump on to share our community example. So if anyone has any resources that they've used and found helpful, whether that's websites or books, or if you have videos that you find helpful for you or you find helpful for kids, please share. I'm sure we're all very interested in getting more resources. But I've listed a few here as well. Kids Against Bullying has age-appropriate resources for younger kids. So they have resources for the victims of bullying as well as the aggressors. So they actually have like a "Do You Bully" quiz, which I think can be kind of helpful. Teens Against Bullying is pretty similar, but it's resources for older kids, so teenagers, and they include resources like how youth can advocate for themselves, as well as advocate for peers that are being bullied. Stop Bullying has resources for parents, teachers, and kids. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop for getting lots of resources across the board. The Committee for Children is an organization that's dedicated to improving social emotional function more broadly, but they have some really excellent resources on bullying, and they actually link to other resources that I really liked. So they have like some really fun Sesame Street videos that I think makes information about bullying a little bit more accessible for kids. And the Cyber Smile Foundation is entirely dedicated to reducing online bullying and victimization. And they have lots of resources relevant for cyberbullying. I think that's from a lot of educators I've heard, that's kind of a growing concern, is how to kind of best support youth while they're frequently engaging in technology use and experiencing victimization on digital platforms. With that, I'll hand it off to Aaron. Thank you.
Hey, all right, thank you. First off, great job. I think that was really, really good information, and I do appreciate you sharing, as I'm sure everybody else does. And so then I will give a little bit about even why I'm talking. And I want to say to start, I'm by no means an expert, and what I'm talking about is really my experience with the topic. And that doesn't mean that there aren't 1,000 people doing 1,000 different and better things. And so I would encourage anybody to interject if there's something that's great to interject with. So I had talked with Christy and some other people through Telehealth ROCKS about some of the feelings that I have towards bullying, because I feel like it's something that's very prevalent on my mind and has been for a long time. I was a middle school counselor for about 12 years, and then I moved into a role of administration. And so early on in my career, I would do very traditional bullying lessons and very, what I thought was really good stuff. But it seemed like the instances of people reporting or kids reporting bullying continued to grow and grow and grow. And I was just beating my head against a wall trying to figure out, what was I doing wrong? Like, I'm saying all this stuff, why isn't this being fixed? And so I started taking a little deeper dive into my own practices of working with our students in our district and seeing some places that I felt like we could improve. And so that's what I was sharing with Christy, is not our expertise, but some of the places that we fell short and where did we go from there. And so one of the things that helped me is that my principal, principals are busy. He started asking me to take on a little bit of discipline. And what I realized, in most instances where kids were reporting bullying, when you would speak with the other kid, they felt like they were also the victim. And so I found myself in the situation over and over and over where I would hear, yeah, but they. And what I realized is that a lot of the things that were reported, and I should qualify this as me saying, what I'm talking about are the things that don't really fall under the actual like meat of bullying, where we really need to take this seriously. We really need to address it. But I'll speak for counselors and say, there's a good percentage of our time that is spent dealing with bullying that may not actually be bullying. And that's the part that I wanted to address, and where I wanted to look into it. Because what I realized is that a lot of students heard that, in my experience, heard bullying education as anybody who was ever rude, mean, or said anything to you was bullying. And they would go home and report to their parents that they were bullied. And they would come to the teacher on the playground and say something that in their mind, they were following instructions. They heard, if somebody is bullying you, go tell a trusted adult. And so they would follow that instruction, go to an adult and say, well, so-and-so did blah, blah, blah. And the teachers, who were understandably taking 20 minutes out of their day to breathe for a second, would say, well, okay, that's fine, sweetheart, go back out and play. And the kid would maybe say, but I did the thing I was supposed to do. And when they would tell their family, well, what did the teacher do? Nothing, she told me to go play. But it wasn't communicated, kiddo, you weren't being bullied. So-and-so was just being a jerk, took the ball. It's okay, move along with your day. But it's like the definition wasn't clear. And so just to put myself in practice, I went back into a fourth grade classroom the other day that just so happened to be talking about bullying. And I asked them to describe bullying, and they gave me a phenomenal textbook definition. And I said, quick, raise your hand if you've ever been bullied. And every kid in the room raised their hand. I said, okay, now raise your hand if you've ever bullied somebody. And the one kid in the back who had just come back from the principal's office raised his hand. And I was like, well, I don't think the numbers match up in this. I don't think that that's how this works. And so it was just another good refresher for me to think through that. One of the things that I believe we did once we started to realize that not all bullying is bullying was to start with talking about grit, resilience, grace, being disrespected, internal feelings. Like, what are all of the things that the skill set that the kids need before we get into talking about bullying? Because I felt like we were pretty quick to say, well, this is a national topic, it's a big deal, and we know it's important, so we're going to talk about it. But I felt like we hadn't done the groundwork before then to talk about how do you become a whole person? What does it feel like when you're disrespected? What does it feel like when you're embarrassed or insecure? How do you handle internal strife versus identification? And so one of the things that I started doing when I would talk to kids was they would come to me and they would describe what happened. And you have to make that delineation of, this is true bullying and we need to address it in a very serious manner, or this is a kid who heard a definition of a word, and like all kids, they feel like it all applies to them, right? So like, I can tell you when my kids were going through Red Ribbon Week, because if I had a beer during a Chiefs game, they'd be like, oh, Dad might be an alcoholic. You're like, no, I had a beer during a Chiefs game. But they take in what we say. They believe us. They trust us. And so whatever we give them, they believe it 100%. And so one of the things that I started doing with some of the students that I had is that they would tell me, like, I think, this happened. And my response would sometimes just be, man, that sucks. What are you going to do about it? And it would somewhat jar them because they're like, well, I did what I'm supposed to do about it. You're going to deal with it. I told you, you're the adult, you go fix the situation. And that's where I found that we did a better job when we veered into, okay, so you felt this emotion. Now let's talk about what we do with those things. And I really wanted to relook at bullying as almost as a way of saying, we're not going to talk about bullying. We're going to talk about emotional strength and belief in yourself and things that you can handle. And I'm getting a phone call, sorry. And what I found is that our kids were stronger than we gave them credit for. They had more resilience than sometimes we believed that they had. And so then as you sort of start to spread that message of, hey, teachers, we're gonna handle this a little bit differently. Will you help through the mentoring of kids? And instead of saying, okay, go back out and play, take the 2 seconds to stop them and say, sometimes kids hurt our feelings, and that happens. We're going to make it through this. If it still is bothering you in 20 minutes, when we get in from recess, let's talk about it. And a lot of times the kids you could kind of work through that. No different than as a counselor, sometimes I would have to say, man, that's hard. Why don't you come talk to me about it during your lunch period? And a lot of times the kids are like, well, hold on. It's not enough for me to give up I don't want to talk to you during lunch. Okay, then let's talk about, was it a real thing that rose to the level of me doing an investigation into this? And even helping them coach through, how are you going to tell your family tonight what you went through? What do they want to hear? What do they need to hear of this? And it's not as if we could do that with every single kid in every single situation. But as a counselor, you get to know those kids who you're like, this is the 15th time that you've gone through this. We need to work on this in a different way than simply identifying. It's like the Magna Carta. We have a lot of high school kids who can tell you the year the Magna Carta was signed. And if you ask them, why is it important? They're like, yeah, I have no idea, but I had to memorize that date. That's good, like A quadrant, we identified this. But my mindset is we have to move those kids into the sort of the D quadrant of education, where we're talking about actually utilizing it and making it something that's more than just, I can point to what bullying looks like. And so that's sort of where we've come from, and where we're at. And so don't get me wrong, our elementary counselors are still, doing some things. I would say this if they were on here or not. There's some things that I think they do great, some things that I would like to see them do differently. And so it's still something that we're actively working on. Overall, what do we want for our students versus spending 3 days on a lesson that really probably impacts them for the remainder of their life because we didn't take the time and depth to talk about the whole instead of just saying, when somebody's mean, call that bullying and tell somebody until they fix it. So that was kind of quick, but I think that it's an area that a lot of people want to look for a solution to and a cure for, and I don't think that exists. And I think sometimes the cure for it is to go backwards to not talking about it in the same way we think about it, and talking about it more of, we're all humans, we all go through stuff. You are stronger than you think you are, and you can handle this. And then there are times you can't. And what do we do with the times that you really can't? And then we can actually deal with the real meat of the things that we see as bullying and the kids don't. So, Christy, is that?
Yes, thank you so much.
You bet.
That was perfect.
Okay. I listen, it's my own anxiety. I was nervous and afraid that somebody in the chat was going to say something terrible about me. So we're all we're all not immune to the feelings of being judged by peers.
Absolutely. Does anybody have any questions for either Daryl or for Aaron? Feel free to unmute or to type in the chat. You're also welcome to email us afterwards if you think of some after that. So I will hand it back to Daryl to go through our key takeaways here at the end.
Yeah, so our 3 key takeaways, I tried to condense them into 3, is that bullying is pretty prevalent. Kind of as Aaron referenced, it's not all kids that experience it, so it's certainly not a universal experience, but that there is a good number of kids that are experiencing repeated victimization at some point in their childhood. Also, that bullying and victimization have identifiable risk factors as well as developmental consequences. And having a really good understanding of those identifiable risk factors can help us to kind of prevent bullying by improving some of the things that Aaron referenced, like some of that resiliency and the ability to handle conflicts and the ability to regulate emotions. And yeah, that there's lots of ways that parents, schools and educators can help prevent bullying and respond appropriately when bullying does happen, and to do so collaboratively across homes, schools, and teachers.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Daryl, for your presentation today. And thanks, Aaron, for sharing what you're doing in your school district. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. We will send the slides and the recording to your email after this session. Just give us a little bit of time to process it. We also will post them on the Telehealth ROCKS website and the Facebook page. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at telehealthrocks@kumc.edu. And we look forward to seeing you in the new year on January 10th to discuss self-harm.